Oh wow, it has eyes and everything.
Yes.
It's like an owl.
Oh, yeah.
Oh wow. That's cool. I was like, have I drank too much, or is that actually starting to form into a?
And it's really cool because as people talk, it turns to your
Okay.
voices.
Yeah. See, we talked about AI earlier, and the owls are coming for us, so.
So no one in the audience make any noise ever for the next however long this is.
It's gonna be like a 2-minute drone.
So the head will turn, so or the eyes will turn? All we see is Robert.
Yeah, let's,
Maybe move to the other side.
I think when you guys start talking.
Well, welcome everyone to our opening of the Flagler's Few exhibit tonight. We have Andre Frattino, and he is a professional illustrator and storyteller with experience utilizing various mediums. As a published graphic novelist, ghost tour guide, a reality television and podcast personality, he keeps busy. Born and raised in Gainesville, Florida, Frattino spent his childhood summers on the beaches of Matanzas Inlet. Rich history and folklore of St. Augustine inspired him to create his own stories about the ancient city. The Florida-focused graphic novel series, The Flagler's Few. This series includes The Reaper of St. George Street and The Vampire of Matanzas, which is the basis of our fall exhibit this year. And we also have Theodore Leo, and he's the managing editor at Aftershock Comics and a Flagler College alum. He has a passion for producing innovative ways to tell, experience, and consume stories by combining his expertise in project coordination, creative, and story development. With nearly a decade of professional comic book experience, he has worked his way up from editorial intern to managing editor while shepherding industry heavyweight stories from pitch to comic shelf. So please welcome our guest. So we're going to start the question and answer with Teddy. Teddy, why does storytelling make such an impact on society?
So they made up that question. We talk about this a lot in comics, especially when there's so many different mediums coming out like every day, and you're trying to think like, is our profession gonna be around for a long time? But I think at the heart of comics is obviously stories, and I think at the heart of society is storytelling, be it through places like this, where you look at these maps and just people who are on those ships and the stories they brought here, the stories in these maps tell us about things. All the museums, places like St. Augustine, all the history that lives here. I think storytelling is at the heart of society, and society is at the heart of storytelling, or at least good stories. So I think that's why it makes such a large impact on society, is they kind of go hand in hand. And like with Andre's stories and stuff, you see that reflected, and all the stuff we do at Aftershock and all that. I just think storytelling is a piece of us. It really makes us human.
Thank you. Moving on, Andre, what inspired you to focus your efforts on historical fiction and nonfiction within the comic industry?
Well, before I do that, I just gotta thank you and the Historical Society for having us. It is a great, I don't even want to say pleasure or honor. This is literally the like conglomeration of what I wanted these graphic novels to do, which was to touch the city of St. Augustine. So thank you all for having us here. Thank you very much for doing this. I sound like we're like in like a, you know, voting, what is it? The actual like, you know, the primaries right now. My first one, thank you. I'll vote for you. It's like my running mate here. But no, I think what's really important, I think to answer that question is to prove that, you know, people like Teddy and I, which are in the comic book world, there's more to comics than just Spider-Man and Superman and Batman. You know, I mean, when you think of comics, most people think, oh, these guys are just nerds in the basement that do, you know, stuff with Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man. But, you know, comic books and graphic novels in the past 10 to 15 years plus, even almost 20 years now, has really expanded outwards. I mean, historical, you know, preservation even is told through graphic novel comic book form. Politics are told through graphic novel form, psychology, science, math. Not even just traditional classic literature is now expanded through graphic novels and comics. So what really inspired me to focus on that was to touch on lesser told stories, because there's a lot of stories that we learn on a day-to-day basis within even our own communities that we didn't realize before. We're like, that's a really interesting idea. For example, I was in the city of Bluffton earlier this morning, and town of Bluffton, they don't like to go by the city of Bluffton, the town of Bluffton up in South Carolina. And one of the houses that the historic preservationist was touring me of said that it was owned by, it's a twin house, owned by two brothers whose wives never spoke to each other all their lives, you know? So like sister-in-laws never spoke to each other, a wall that blocked both of them across both rooms, and you take whatever you want to take from that, but to me, that was already a story. I was like, there is a story here that should be told. So I think there's a lot of, I think graphic novel and comic book mediums really lend itself to expanding beyond just the typical stereotypical superhero. And I think that there's a lot of great stuff, that stories that we'll probably never get a chance to tell in our lifetimes, that hopefully will see the light of day down the way.
Thank you. Teddy, why do you believe sequential storytelling has stood the test of time?
This is another one we talk about a lot, because again, because there's so many different mediums out there coming online, you always have to wonder, like, how long do we have as an industry? But if you look back, how long comics has been around, and just how long sequential storytelling has been around. If you go into a cave, there's cave paintings, and really it's like the start of it all, right? Pictures and then words, and at the heart of sequential storytelling is pretty much just pictures, words in different mediums, in different ways over the years. You know, for a long time, it was at the newsstand where you got your comics, and it shifted over to the comic book shops. Now you have a lot of stuff digitally on platforms like Webtoon and Comixology stuff. But I think it has kind of adapted over time, but really stayed true to what it is. Because similar to the first question that I was talking about, storytelling is a part of us. We need ways to warn people about evil and good and inspire people to be heroes and all these different things. And I think sequential storytelling is one of the last mediums we have that takes down all the fluff that you might have with special effects, or like an actor that can hide a bad script and all these different things. I think it really is like just storytelling at its most, back to cave paintings and like passing the story in between the roar of fire. Like it just brings you back to what makes us human.
Andre, what is your process and how do you feel it deviates from other writers in your industry?
Well, I know this is hard. I don't know how I do this one knowing that you'd be here, because Teddy's gonna be like, it doesn't deviate at all. I mean, he works with like 20 writers who all pretend that they're all, you know, pretentious with figuring it out. Like, yeah, so
Yeah.
I write comic books for a living, you know. But I think what how mine deviates, I think at least from a historical standpoint, because so much of my material is historical fiction or nonfiction, it requires a lot of research. You know, people who become the writers for Spider-Man, you know, their research is reviewing all the previous issues of Spider-Man and maybe kind of channeling their inner angsty child, you know, teenager. But for me, you know, if I'm writing about something that's historical based, it's really important to always make sure that it comes from a very researched and very grounded way. Because I'm sure as many of you are as historical buffs out there, the worst thing that takes you out of any movie or book that you read that's historical fiction is when instantly something is in it that is not supposed to be. You know, like if it's the Revolutionary War and somebody pulls out a 6-shooter, and you're like, okay, the budget obviously wasn't there for somebody who knew what the hell they were doing. So it's really important in my way process. I spend quite a bit of time deep diving into other historical records, reading other biographers, takes on the stories, even when it comes to The Reaper of St. George Street and The Vampire of Matanzas Inlet, which are very much paranormal supernatural books. It's really important to make sure that we are basing some of that off of historical facts and figures. So a lot of my process starts there and then dives into writing and illustrating, which even within the industry of comics is not a rarity, but not every writer does artwork and not every artist does writing. So it really falls on me when doing this series to become both the artist and the writer, which is good and bad at the same time. So.
Do you write one first?
Yeah, you always write first. You script something out, you know, because if you just decide to put pen to the pencil into the paper and you're drawing, you could sit there and draw 300, 400, 500 pages. You know, you need structure, and structure comes from that writing, so yeah, I always start off with scripting something, which looks very much like a standard film script, you know, except for camera angles, it's page panels. And from there, what I'll do is a layout, which is thumbnail illustrations, which in art world form is just illustrations done the size of your thumbnail, is what traditionally they're called. So super simple little sketchy illustrations, in my case, stick figures, which if you want to see, will be in the exhibit upstairs. There's a whole thing that shows you both the script to the actual thumbnail illustration. And then from there, you sketch it out, do a rough draft, and then rough draft with final pencils, the ink. So when my English teacher in kindergarten, or not kindergarten, in elementary, middle school said, you gotta do a rough draft before you do a final draft, they weren't lying. Yeah, that's really how you happen.
Teddy, can you share a career story that illustrates how unique the comics profession is?
Actually two, because I think the comic community what separates it from a lot of other industries. I mean, it's a rough industry. There's a famous quote from a legendary industry, Jack Kirby, where he says, "Comics will break your heart, kid." And we both have felt that. So I think two stories that highlight for me is first one. I'm trying to remember what I can say this. Yeah. First one, New York Comic Con 2021. It was the first one back after COVID, so all the publishers, the event space, Javits Center in New York, everyone was worried that what's gonna happen, We don't want the fans to get sick, we don't want the editors to get sick, and mostly we didn't want the writers and creatives to get sick because they need to make books, and that's how we make our money, so.
There's 350,000 people who come to New York Comic Con every year.
Yeah.
To set the stage.
Yeah, so it's a massive event. So one of the things that were canceled was the parties. Usually there's a lot of big parties at New York Comic Con, apparently editors and all of us like to party. Now, if you work at Marvel or work at DC, like everyone's trying to get into these parties, because that's really where you might be able to make a connection with a writer, another editor, get the, your promotion, all the things you have to do in the business, and have a good time. And that year, it was all canceled, all the parties. You could have New York Comic Con, but you can't have your parties. And I was at our usual editorial dinner with our staff, and like halfway through, our editor-in-chief ended up getting a text from a few of his old Marvel buddies, and that there was gonna be a meetup of the old Marvel crew, and pretty much all the legendary editors at a bar near the old Marvel office. And while we were leaving, I thought I was gonna go crash at my hotel room, so I knew I had to be up at like 5 AM to work the booth and everything. My boss, editor-in-chief, and our managing editor at the time, they were like, "Oh, come with us to this little Marvel get together." I was like, like I'm an associate editor, you guys don't care. They're like, no, come, we'll introduce you to everyone. So we're walking over there, and I'm like nervous as hell. I'm like, where are we going? And we go down this like side street into this bar that very quickly I started realizing that, okay, this is like where everyone in Marvel comes, because there's like sketches on the wall and all these things, drinks named after Marvel people, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. Now, when I walked in, I was expecting some old Marvel people there, but what I ended up finding out that I was actually at the new editor-in-chief's private party. So pretty much I was in a spot where every Marvel employee, my level at the time, would have probably given their a limb to go to this party. And I found myself in the middle, and the whole comics community, none of them over there decided to treat me like, oh, you're just, some associate editor, or assistant editor at the time, blah, blah. They treated me like I was one of them, and they're like level, and we talked all about stories, and I was having conversations with literally like legendary people that I couldn't believe that they were talking to me. So yeah, that was definitely a time where like you could see where when you could have been totally like, who's this kid? Why is he at our private party? They brought me in and just, took us, just tried to share their knowledge with us. The other story is kind of one of the things you notice in the industry is, I think a lot of times when people have an idea of what this industry is going to be, or any industry they want to get into, I didn't grow up reading comics. I didn't care about comics until the movies came out. My plan was I was gonna go design theme parks. The only reason I got into comics was because I wanted to design Marvel theme parks. So I thought I should learn about comics. But seeing New York Comic Con, I want to step out of New York Comic Con. Seeing your
Should I sneak you in my, my backpack?
Yeah,
this
sneak
year?
me next time.
He's not coming this year, I'm going by myself.
Yeah, could have gone to the last stuff. Gotta move on.
That's true.
But one time we were like walking through and like everyone in the industry, like all these people are like giants, you can't talk to them. And at Aftershock, and mostly everyone, like you have your parties, like I was saying. And we had our Aftershock party, but I was working the booth, really good working the booth, so they was pushing me into the booth. We were on our way back, trying to make it to our party in time before it started kicking off. And our head of publishing, this guy Joe, and his daughter was with me, we were the last three left. And we're like sweating from carrying all this stuff, working the booth all day, exhausted, like I have to get to this party before, especially as an editor, I have to talk to a lot of people, and make connections and stuff. And while we're walking there, Joe all of a sudden like body slams this older gentleman that's walking with his wife up toward us, and I was like, oh my lord, what is Joe doing? And then this older gentleman, without seemingly turned around and pushed Joe back. And I was like, what is going on? I have to like fight these people, what is happening right now? And then Sarah, Joe's daughter, who was with us, she's, oh, it's Jim. I was like, Jim? Who's Jim? And in the comics, you probably know Thanos. Jim Starlin created Thanos. And I'm sitting there full of sweat, like a loser, meeting a legend in the industry. And he also immediately like helped grab some stuff. He was coming to our party, he was like, let me grab that for you, and we talked for like the rest of the night all about comics and stuff. So I think what sets it apart from having meet from the different industries is just how open everyone is and how everyone comes for aid and like welcomes a lot of people. Now there's people out there who like tries to lock comics down, but I think for the most part, it's a very welcoming industry and they try to pass on institutional knowledge and try to give people the opportunity to take over, you know, because Spider-Man will outlive all of us, Batman will outlive all of us, all these stories outlive all of us, so we're just the shepherd of it while we're here. So that's what, yeah, so that's it.
Thank you. Andre, the Reaper of St. George Street started as a movie and then became a book, a little backwards from the usual process. How do you feel that has transformed your work?
Well, I'm sure we all have seen the movie of a favorite book of ours and then been like, this is total crap, why did we have to pay money to watch this? Because the movies always fall short of the books, right? I mean, the books always have so much more involved in them. But when I was creating the movie, we'll put it in quotes, was 2004, and if some of you remember, St. Augustine in 2004 is very different from St. Augustine now. You could actually go out in the historic district at 10 o'clock at night and nobody would be there. So you could easily walk around dressed as a reaper and have sword fights and people phasing into buildings was not a problem back then. But I think how the movie really transformed it was, I had not yet gone to the Savannah College of Art and Design, which is where I went to my undergraduate school, and actually got a degree in sequential art, which is the fancy term for saying comic books. It's the one you put that finger up when you're having cocktails and say, I majored in sequential art. And so I hadn't really fully learned my trade as a comic book artist yet, to a professional level. So the film, surprisingly, was the easier medium to build. And so I put together a group of friends of mine, people I knew, and we came to St. Augustine for about maybe 4 or 5 weekends in a row. I lived in Gainesville, Florida at the time. I would borrow my mother's station wagon. I would throw 10 people in that station wagon. We would drive over here, and then we would film from 11 a.m. in the morning till 4 o'clock in the morning the next day. And it was great. It was the best summer of my life doing that. And then afterwards, I left. We did actually a red carpet show for that movie. And Gainesville, we had a red carpet show. I bought like 10 yards of red fabric from Joann's Fabric, and we made a red carpet and everything. And then I went off to SCAD and did my art schooling. And for my senior project, I actually decided to adapt that film into the graphic novel you guys know today. And where I think that the graphic novel earns from what the movie did was that the movie allowed me, on a smaller budget and on a time frame of 90 minutes, it allowed me to get the beats. You know, I hit the beat specifically story narrative wise, flavor wise, history wise that I wanted to do, that allowed me to then transpose that into the graphic novel and expand there. So, you know, we think a lot about how movies watered down what the books had created. In this instance, the movie allowed me to season the graphic novel to make it more than what that film was, but still hit those same beats that I knew would work. So yeah, so that's how I think that it was transformative from film to book, which is something that's not, I don't think has really ever been done really before anywhere else, so.
Kind of funny that, did your friends who helped you with the movie, what did they think of the books?
I mean, they laugh at it because I think what's funny is you saw the movie for the first time, and if you haven't seen the movie, it's on YouTube. You can actually type in Flagler Stew,
And we have a QR code right in the
Oh, yeah.
inside for it.
and it's upstairs playing, which is amazing that it's playing here. I can't get over it. But the thing was is that all the characters in the book are based off of the actual actors who played them in the movie. So for them to see themselves illustrated in publicated form, to know that they now have like a life of their own within these comics, I think they really get a kick out of that. And some of the people that are in the movie that then transpose in the comics, they are those people. Like Professor Merriweather is very much my friend Talon May, who plays him in the book, in the movie. And he is a leathersmith, he is a sword fighter, he is a Renaissance fair carny, you know, so like he is literally transposed, everything from that character is in the movie and then ultimately into the story, so. As well as Roger Grimes, who plays the debonair pirate in that. I don't know where he is nowadays, he could be on the other side of the world fighting ninjas, I wouldn't know, so, yeah.
Teddy, what does the editor-creator working relationship look like?
Yes, what is the editor creator? I haven't had that experience.
Well, it's very collaborative. I think a lot of people, especially when I first get in, they're like, oh, I can do it all, which, and, you know, you can go so far. But when, like any big task, when you have a group of people all working toward this same common goal, what you get is the best product, because you have everyone bringing their expertise. So for an editor-creator, depending if you're like story editing, a lot of times it's just giving notes back and forth, understanding the creator. One of the big parts that got passed down to me is an editor's not only giving story notes, but you know, they're the defender of the creator, they're making sure they get paid, they should know when their birthday is, when the kid's birthday is, their favorite color, what they hate to eat, all these different elements, because depending on what creator, who it is, something might, you know, if you have their favorite food at an event, maybe that means a pitch comes to you instead of going another place. They feel like it's a home rather than just, you know, a job or gig. So the relationship is definitely different, creator to creator. You have like juggernauts in the industry where they kind of, someone like Jim Starlin, someone like Garth Ennis, big people in the industry where they kind of do their own thing, they've kind of built up their experience, and when I give notes to them, the first time I had to do it, I remember my boss was like, hey, you have a Garth book, you have a Jim Starlin book, go get some notes. I was like, how? These guys created like comics, what am I supposed to tell them? But once you like get that out of your mind, you're like, okay, this is your job, you're gonna have to do this. You very quickly start seeing that every creator, doesn't matter what level they are, makes mistakes, needs a second eye to be like, hey, you're missing a story beat. You know, me and Andre have done some outlines together for different stories, and it's very clever. It's back and forth, notes. Oh, that's a great idea. What if we threw this in there? What do you think about this? Like texting, like I thought about this last night. Like, so it is an all-consuming, especially as an editor, because while creator might have a couple projects going on average, I usually have about between 60 and 80 books that I'm juggling in all different parts of the creative process, and all the projects that we've done in the past that I have to just remember those, keep those relationships going, because we need more stories going forward. So it's a very complicated but rewarding thing. So when you get to the end, and especially like when I go into Barnes and Noble, I go to a store and I see a kid like reading a comic that I worked on, or I know like the writer of a book, I see them breathing and like they're getting something out of it. That's like the best feeling, especially like when you're at conventions and you see people cosplaying, dressed up, and they feel like that character connects with them. It makes all the hard work that we usually have to do. Especially as an editor, I usually have to pull teeth sometimes for my creators. They want gigs, but sometimes they don't turn things on time. But yeah, so it's complicated, but it's very rewarding, it's very collaborative process.
Do creators ever reciprocate that, like knowing things about you to pitch it to you, or is it more of a one-way street?
Yeah, no, definitely. Creators will know, like at Aftershock, we're known for our horror books. But we kind of do all sorts of genre. But yeah, you start realizing very quickly what books will work at what publishing houses. You also have to know, sometimes editors are like, I just don't like, I don't know, horror. So you're like, I'm not gonna give them my horror book because maybe they're not gonna know the pitch when it's good. So you kind of have to learn the different people in the industry. I would say more open editor. I don't care what you send me.
Well, I was gonna say, so Teddy and I have never worked together, but we became friends over our mutual love for St. Augustine, and you know, that's actually how we connected. But I think you're selling yourself short in the sense that like, not only are editors I mean, if you know editors within the general scope of writing, there's a difference when it comes to comic books. Because when it comes to comics, editors are very much the people who drive the whole force. And I think that, I mean, the editors I've even worked with have really not been given the dues they deserve, because in a lot of ways, they will repair or fix, or not only champion what you're doing, but they'll make sure that it works. And sometimes as writers, we kind of get lost in the weeds where we think like, ah, this is my story, and I love it, it's great. But it's up to the editor to really decide like, okay, well, this isn't gonna work for the fans. You know, you've got to manage this, you got to fix expectations, you got to get this working. And so a lot of times editors drive the stories. So, you know, as a managing editor, I mean, you drive the stories on almost everything that Aftershock puts out now. So it's kind of a hand-in-hand partnership. I think from a creator standpoint, we have grown to think of editors as not the boss who pays the paychecks as much, which they do, and they should, but also the people who say like, all right, what's gonna make your story that much more attainable, much more relatable? What's gonna make people cry, what's gonna make them laugh, and that way they become kind of partners in the project, so.
Yeah, it's definitely something special when you get, like as an editor, when you work with someone early on in their career, and you help mentor them and give them advice and everything, and then you see them kind of, I would imagine, I don't have a kid, but I would imagine, when you see your kid go off to college and do something, so that's how I feel with my creators are like, oh, I got this gig over here, and we work on this book where I love Ninja Turtles, and they're letting me go write this over or whatever, and I'm like, that is like amazing. So, yeah, it's a cool process to be a part of, because you can see someone grow as a writer, you can help them get better at it. A lot of times, because you're an outside person looking in on all of it, you're not like parents giving like, oh, I loved your story. Like I'm really being like, yeah, this sucks. Let's do this one. This one you got something here or whatever. So, you know, I'm not a friend. I mean, I'm a friend, but it's different. Like if I give my pitch to my brother, I'm like, look at this. Well, he's a little bit of a jerk, so he might be like, this sucks. So a different person, they might be like, this is pretty good, I would read it. But I'm there to be like, this is your best chance of making a really good thing. But yeah, when you see someone, creators go from, can I please write my story, to all of a sudden they're like handing in scripts to you, and like there's been multiple times I'm in my office and I'll get to an end of the script, I'll get to a part of the script, and like I will cry, I'll laugh out loud, and like when you get to that point, you're like, yeah, we're working on something really special. This is what makes all the hard days in comics really like worth it.
Thank you. Andre, what made you choose St. Augustine as the backdrop for your first graphic novel, and how has St. Augustine influenced you in your career?
To answer this question, first I just gotta ask everyone in the audience, who has lived in St. Augustine the longest? Who's been here all their life? Raise your hand.
Mark,
Okay.
Thomas,
Yeah.
we got a crew here.
All are signed.
Andre,
Yes.
I commuted to Jacksonville to the Times Union for 18 years, and that was, I was living in St. Augustine from 10 o'clock at night until 9 in the morning, and everything other than Sunday church was Jacksonville oriented. So.
Okay, but still St. I mean, you are
Yeah.
St. Augustine, so. And then for the rest of everyone else, I know they all raise their hands, but how long has other people been here? Like, How long have you been in St. Augustine?
Well, I still live in Jacksonville, but I was in St. Augustine for 3.5 years at Flagler, and I've been coming here my whole life.
Okay, and I know you guys have been here all your lives. What about you back there? You were in Jacksonville too, you commute here. You only came here not too long ago, right?
Yeah, we've been here about 12 years.
Okay, but I think what the whole reason why all of us love St. Augustine and why we all come here is just, it's the culture, it's the history, it's the heritage. You know, how many cities can you walk down? Like I dressed up as that stupid reaper today and wandered down the street by myself, you know? And I was sweating my ass off, but I still I just marvel at this city. I think St. Augustine is such an understated historical treasure. You know, I mean, this is the oldest city in America, and people still don't know that. I've been a ghost tour guide in Savannah for 20 years now. 20 years giving ghost tours in Savannah. And there's one particular part of my ghost tour, we stand in front of Oglethorpe's monument. General Oglethorpe was the founder of Savannah. He came down here, and you guys have a little park named after him, because he tried to lay siege to Castillo and he didn't win. And his whole reason for building Savannah was because of St. Augustine. And I can tell you that in 20 years of giving those ghost tours, I always love standing in front of that monument, because I always like to stick it to Savannah, which I love, don't get me wrong, I love my city of Savannah. But I love it because I'm so proud of St. Augustine, because I've been coming here since I was 6 months old. My godparents own a beach house on the Matanzas Inlet, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to spend every summer here. And I can't think of a better city in Florida, and dare say the nation, that I think really cultivates flavor, heritage, history, diversity. We've had major players in the world come here. We've had everyone from Martin Luther King Jr., who's been here. We've had the King of Spain come to Savannah. We've had Sir Francis Drake try to take over the city. I mean, there's so much in this city that people take for granted. And I think so many graphics, so many comic books, no offense, you know, to Marvel or DC, even though you weren't, but you know, the superhero comics is what I mean. It's like, well, you went and did that Marvel thing, so I just wanted to Marvel. But no offense to Marvel and DC, but like Spider-Man is in New York, and then you've got like Metropolis is really New York by day, and you know, Gotham is New York by night. You know, like everybody's doing things in New York all the time, and it gets exhausting after a while. So I think that St. Augustine was a perfect place to set this story, and a perfect place for a lot of fiction, because there is just so much stuff. Like you can walk down the streets today and there's a thickness that just permeates through you, and you're like, there's creativity here, there's imagination here. You know, St. George Street is Diagon Alley from Harry Potter. It is Mos Eisley's from Star Wars. You know, it could be anything you want it to be, and it's the perfect setting for it. And there's just so many cool things to write about. So I came here after being here for so long and realized when I was, you know, hitting my late teens, I was like, I've got to do a story set here. And it still influences my career even to this day, because I still focus a lot of my graphic novel storytelling through historical fiction and nonfiction. And that comes from that love of not just the ghost of St. Augustine, but of the history of St. Augustine. And that has made me a graphic historian in that sense, so.
Ted, what is the hardest part of being an editor and creator?
It's a lot harder. I say the hardest part of being an editor. Right now, at Aftershock, the past year, we've been in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, actually. And last summer, we started figuring out that creators weren't getting paid. And as an editorial team, we're trying to figure out like why creators would email us. We haven't been paid in a couple weeks. And then it turned out I haven't been paid in like 6 months. We were like, why did you wait? How have you waited this long to tell us? What's going on? And trying to figure out what was happening, and then piecing together everything, and then having everything you kind of build start collapsing around you. And at this time, I took over the managing editor role. So I'm basically the managing editor in Crisis. But to get, like I said, you build a relationship with your creators when you know their kids' birthdays, what they like, what they don't like, you know, the struggles that they're going through, their family's going through. And you get emails of, you know, like begging for their money, like I'm gonna be evicted, or, you know, my wife just gave birth and we are having trouble, we need this payment, like why can't you get it to me? Those are days that are really tough on editors. Because, like Andre said, we're very connected to the creative process, it means we're very connected to our creators. And business stuff is not, it's separate from things, and, you know, they think creators as a part of the cog of everything, but we know actually the face and the stories behind creators. So, for an editor, especially over the past year, dealing with it personally, definitely the hardest thing is just being able to have to watch out for your creator and knowing that like you can't, a lot of times it's like out of your control, even though you try to do everything you can to help them. So that always, I think, strains on any editor, it doesn't matter where they are, if you talk to them, yeah, they have a horror story where they think, you know, I wish I could have gotten that person, or something could have been different for their family. We filed for bankruptcy on December 19th. So, you know, all my creators were basically begging to be paid for Christmas. And I know I have a bunch of creators that are single moms, and they couldn't provide gifts for their kids that Christmas, and that, to this day, killed me. And, that's definitely the hardest part with being an editor, is trying to separate it, and like when I turn off the computer, be like, okay, I have to put that away. But you can't, because you know that stories aren't written by some machine or created, you know, by like AI or whatever. They have their own problems going on, and, you know, it definitely weighs heavily on a bunch of editors. So as a creator, I mean, you probably, I've written this stuff for you.
Yeah, I can kind of follow that. Didn't you mention something about the writer's strike, Andre, was affecting you?
Oh, yeah, the writer's strike is, it's mostly been in film and television, but it is trickled down into comics too. You know, there are publishers and, a lot of times publishers have taken on projects such as Aftershock or other major players who, you know, bank on the fact that they're picking up these projects so that they can then turn around and sell their rights to Netflix and, you know, Amazon Prime and Apple and, you know, everything else. So it's trickled down to the creator world, and in the sense that there are publishers that are having to return rights back to the artists or creators, and are just not able to do anything with those right now. So it's kind of a struggle for all of us, I think. But the fight is worth it, because the fight is against AI. And producers in the film industry want to take AI and, you know, use it for everything that they do now, and the writers are the ones who will be affected by that, and by change, us artists and creators in this world will also be affected by it. So it's a hard time to be a creator. But I will say that, again, Teddy has done amazing. He has gone from an associate editor over at Aftershock Comics to becoming their managing editor in Crisis, and is helping this out. And I don't think that they could ask for a better person. I have not worked with him. He's not paying me to say this, but I think that he is definitely but these are the kind of people that fight in the trenches. Comics is a tough medium. He said it himself, comics will make you cry. And I think nobody gets into this industry thinking they're gonna be the next, you know, Frank Miller making oodles of billions of cash. You know, nobody has dreams and aspirations of being a rock star in comics. You know, they do it because they want to be a writer, they want to be an artist, they have a love for that storytelling narrative. And I think, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow, but a lot of us have to really, you know, pay our dues to make it in that world of comics, and it's a labor of love.
Essentially, you mentioned that everyone's in it for like the stories and everything, because one thing that struck me when we were continuing to go for bankruptcy, hopefully next week will be done, but is so many creators, if they didn't have to pay their rent and all the things you have to do in life, really most of them were like, after a while, after like a year, they were like, honestly, I just want my stories, like when are we gonna get back to doing stories, like I have all these scripts, I wanna get drawing again. And that means I was thinking, like, we owe you a lot of money, but you're still like, I just want to get back to being creative and doing these things with you guys. And like I said, it's really, we're all in it for telling stories.
I don't know how many of you have actually written your own book, maybe you have, but there is something alone in just holding this, you know? Holding this in your hands and getting it in a box, like that alone is worth its weight in gold. Because it's the manifestation of everything that you put out, it's your soul, it's your heart, it's your love. So, you know, really what matters to me is I've done projects for nothing. If it meant that I believed in the story and the narrative and I wanted it to go out. Yeah, I mean, it's an art form. It's truly an art form. And it's an art form that we deserve to be paid in, like any other artist, but it's also an art form that is pretty relentless in that as well. So,
As an editor, when I see pages, I just think of all like the crises that happen to get this page done. Like I'm like, oh yeah, letter didn't respond to me for 6 weeks for some reason. I don't know what's happened there. Like I just.
This is sort of a throw-in question for you, Teddy. So I actually have a friend who critiques comics on YouTube. She has friends who, and she calls herself Comic Books Will Break Your Heart.
Oh, perfect.
And I was wondering, how does that affect how creators and you as an editor do your work?
Yeah, I think there's some people that kind of get obsessed with the reviews. I remember when I first, as the associate editor, remember, you basically are an editor on everything, but you don't get the editor credit fully on the book, right? Like your superior gets the editor credit. Which is fine, that's how it goes. But when I finally got my first book that I was, you know, this was edited by Taylor Leo and it was set there. I remember when it released, I was like, okay, I gotta check the reviews and see what people thought. I was lucky, my team got me like swept through and was like, this is, there was one review that said, there's only a few comics in the world that I think are perfect, this is as close as you can get to one of those. But then very quickly I started looking at all of our reviews to see, okay, what would they say about this book, what about that book? And then my editor-in-chief one day says like, oh, these people aren't really liking it, maybe we should shift the story. And he's like, you can't let the outside crap, we have to do our job as editors. Some books are gonna fail, some stories are gonna hit, and some aren't, that's just how it goes. So it definitely affects people. It might affect creators, it definitely affects creators, because again, it is our livelihood, so if all of a sudden there's an editor who cares about reviews and you go to them, like I have a pitch, and they're like, well, you've done 6 books back to back, bad reviews, you might not have future opportunities in the industry. But I think for the most part, kind of similar to all, kind of have to just ignore the talking heads, because there's a lot of times we'll see, especially when we filed for bankruptcy, there was a lot of, pretty much about every 5 minutes there was an article about us. Which I get, you owe a lot of money to people, and it should have been all out there for people to see. But there's a lot of people telling or saying how comics were made or what goes into it, and they're wrong. So that's what you have to remember, that a lot of those people don't understand really what it takes behind the scenes, and it's easy to fall into the trap, especially when you first start getting into it, to be like, oh, I have to look at reviews. But after a while, you just have to be like, especially as managing editor in comics, you just don't have time really to look at the reviews. My friends are always like, oh, you must read all comics all the time. I'm like, other than when I get off of work, I don't, because I'm like all day I'm reading comics. The last thing I want to do when I get off from work is like read reviews about comics, because that just sounds like the worst thing to do. So yeah, I mean, it definitely affects people, but I think that you have to learn to just block it out.
And Andre, what are the benefits to regionally inspired comics, and do you see other writers doing the same?
I don't really see as much of it as I would like. But I will say that Teddy and I once had a conversation where you were gonna do a graphic novel about Fort Moses, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was really exciting to hear about that. I don't know if that ever panned out.
No, they got the funding actually.
They did?
Yes, they did.
Oh, okay, so, it was meant to help as a fundraiser aspect to it. I think that the benefit of regionally focused comics is that it really brings the heroism home, you know, and I think that it really brings a self-identity in a way. You know, again, if you live in New York, then you have all these superheroes living there, that you feel like a sense of pride of that. But I think places like St. Augustine and Savannah and Charleston and, you know, even places like Miami and Gainesville and, you know, New Orleans could benefit from having more regionally focused storytelling, because it will give a sense of identity that we can explore in those areas that haven't been explored yet. And so I think that my hope is that there are other people. In fact, I do know there are other people doing But I hope that within the next, decade or so, especially with more comics going towards crowdfunding and going towards regional publications, that there is a chance for us to tell more of those stories, because I think that, we don't have to look very far outside our own doors to be inspired by the work we do. And I don't think we need to look very far beyond our own doors to find the places that will print and publish and put those books out for us too, or support them like the community does here, so.
I can tell you, we were very proud to see the research library in your book.
I was just wondering, have you ever been to the research library?
I have actually never been to the research library.
I could tell.
Just go,
Right in the basement.
Well, I know, I mean, I can't say I'm perfect, all right? I did the research as best I could do, but, back in those days, I was afraid to even like knock on people's doors in St. Augustine. I really went around with books that I printed myself and like knocked on tour shop doors and like, "Do you want to sell a graphic novel about St. Augustine?" And a lot of people were like, "Yeah, sure," other people were like, "Get lost," but, so I was sure you would open the door for me until now, but we will have to talk, so. I saw you raising hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you you said, I think you mentioned Fort Mose a minute ago.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can contact them, it might be a good idea to reach out to them again,
Okay.
and they might, should respond.
Okay.
But you talk about historical comics, and you do your research. How do you do research on a historical comic when you don't have a lot of documented research information to go to?
That was a big problem with that project. Luckily, we had started to get access to everything they had. One of the ways we were gonna do it is we had a made-up story that was intertwined with what was happening at the fort. So it was basically about this young girl and this young guy, and it was setting a very specific time frame during Fort really had a lot of information on it, so we could try to piece together. So it wasn't gonna be fully historical, but it was like, how can we get kids, because we were thinking, okay, this is used in like a school setting, to be like, this was a cool story, but then at the same time, while they don't really know, they're actually being taught. So that was our way to do that, but it is very challenging, because when you don't have that information, oftentimes you're, especially story, because we're so story focused, writers would start filling in the, the blanks, and that's where an editor, and we had started putting together a team of historic experts, so we could go back and forth and be like, hey, relax, you can't go too crazy story-wise here, like that's not accurate. So yeah, we were trying to figure out that balance, and that's where I think a lot of times, sometimes it's hard for these books to get off the ground, because you're right, when you have something like Fort Mose where the information around it is very limited, it's hard to tell that story. You don't want to do it any disservice or tell them the wrong light. So yeah, it's a challenge, but try and find people who are passionate and who actually know that place like this, right? Who understand St. Augustine history, going to those experts. Like an editor goes and gets an expert in story and writing and lettering and all that, going to the history people, making sure you're actually doing it the right way.
I think one thing is that, a lot of times people think this comic books and graphic novels are a derivative of novels and fiction and prose, but it's definitely changing in the world right now. Like media and librarians are seeing the benefits of comics, not only as just a standalone medium, but as a ambassador towards mainstream medium. So like, somebody could read, say, my graphic novel, Lane Remembered, and be like, wait, I love this story, now let me read Patrick Smith's actual adaptation to get the full length of the adult story. The idea goes the same with history too, we see ourselves as ambassadors and cultivating for the younger readers and writers, or younger readers, hey, here's a story, here's just the tidbits of it, now go do your own research and get more involved in that. So we hope that, I think that was what your hope was with the Fort Moses story, was it's gonna be a little dramatized, it's gonna be fictional, but the idea, the essence of it is to cultivate that drive to learn more about the story elsewhere, which is what I do in my own historically focused graphic novels. like Tokyo Road Zero Hour, which came out last year, is the story of Ida Tagore, a Japanese American stuck in Japan during World War II. We took all the history we could find on her and adapted it into a novel, but I know there's a plethora of more information that we weren't able to cultivate into that narrative. So it was my hope that, we wouldn't lie or fabricate anything, but we'll definitely leave more information here that will drive those, readers, hopefully future historians and preservationists to say, hey, I want to know more, let me go do my own research.
So in comics right now, the fastest growing sector is young adult being used in schools. They've shown, scientists, smarter people than me, have shown that comics does something in the brain that allows a kid not only to understand how to read and gets reluctant readers to actually read things, but it also teaches them. So a lot of times in comics, it might be saying, I wasn't scared, but then or it might be showing them like, oh, I'm tough, blah, blah, blah. But then it might have a thought bubble where it's like, I'm scared right now. So what they've shown that it allows kids, scientists would explain this much better than I am, but allows kids to kind of work out both of these parts of the brain that oftentimes normal reading just doesn't. So yeah, it's interesting to finally see like libraries, school districts take in this instead of, for a long time, it was like, oh, we don't want kids reading that stuff. That's not real stories, that's not educational. But now they've seen actually how powerful it is, because as someone who always hated when a teacher would be like, you have to read this and hand me a report, oftentimes this is probably why I miss story time, I would not read it, make up a fake report, and she'd be like, oh, that was a great story, and hey, I'm like, I made it up, okay, sounds good. So yeah, the fact that there is stories now, we're seeing a lot of different teachers use it in different ways. I think there's only historical stories I think are actually only going to grow, because for a social studies teacher, especially right now when there's so many different stories under attack, you can actually get kids to learn about something without them really noticing that they're actually learning, which is always, I think, the best way to do it.
I was listening to a podcast on the way into town called Women of Marvel. So it's a podcast by the editor, women editors at Marvel Comics who are doing a podcast about female characters in the Marvel universe. And they were doing one on Shuri, which is Black Panther's sister. And Shuri is supposed to be the most intelligent person in the Marvel universe, geneticist, engineer, mechanic, biologist, everything. And they actually spoke with somebody on this podcast who was she was a chemist. She was a Black chemist, and she was a professor at a university up north. And she actually used vibranium, which is a fictitious mineral in the Marvel universe, but she used it as a test question for her students and a way to say, like, all right, this is a fictional, mineral. What would the chemical makeups be that would create this? And she said the students' reaction was phenomenal. And then they actually started to think, okay, they're a chemist class, these are scientists, but they were thinking outside the box, what would create these, what would make it? And then Scholastic hit her up to actually do a whole educational curriculum for elementary school students based off of that. So just another example of how comics kind of fit itself into any category and inspire so many different people to pursue different careers and kind of cultivate those. So
I think what's also good about comics is we can it's easy for us to show kids that they can be certain things that maybe other mediums aren't, casting people into those certain roles and everything. Comics, there's been multiple times in scripts where I'm like, listen, I know this character looks like me. We have 15 dudes who look like me in this. Can we make this a different person? Like, it doesn't have to be me. I have 15 people that I can look at in this book and be like, that's my character. But when you use it in a library, when anyone can look at it and be like, oh, I can be a chemist, or I can do this, I can do that, and it's because they saw someone in a comic doing it. It's super powerful, and when they're specific for a region, that may be even more powerful, because all of a sudden, it's not a chemist in New York City, it's a chemist that used to live 3 doors down from where I live, so I can do that. So, yeah, I think hopefully, I've seen from all the, even the stuff that we've started greenlighting, once we get, thank you, Steve. Is a lot of, regionally inspired and like, stuff like that, so.
Well, we're gonna end with, does anybody, either of you have anything you'd like to share?
So I will say that, again, the Historical Society here at St. Augustine has inspired me to continue the Flagler Street series. And I can actually say that we have been approved by what was Pineapple Press, who published the first 3 books, to be able to on my own, work on the next book. So I will be able to continue the story, and there will be another Flagler Street graphic novel coming out, hopefully within the next 2 years. I'm actually gonna plan it to be, we'll try and do a book birthday here with the Historical Society, and actually have a signing here. This will be the first inaugural send-off for the 4th book in the Flagler Street series.
Please do.
Yeah, great. Which will definitely feature the library in full, perfectly illustrated, unity. You will all have cameos in it. What more can I do for you? All right? What do I need to do with being your good person? It will be a Raven-centric graphic novel, I can tell you that. So.
Okay, the witch, the
It
witch.
was the witch, and St. Francis Inn will definitely also feature heavily.
Excellent.
Well, we're going to end here. Andre is going to stay here to sign any books or posters or anything that you have. His books are for sale here if anyone is interested in purchasing it. And anyone who would like to go see the exhibit that hasn't yet, please follow me. He's going to join me over there. So if you have any questions for him, he'll be over there with me as well.
I really appreciate it, and thank you, Nicole, you did an amazing job with, I just can't say enough. It's been phenomenal. Thank you to everyone for this, and it's great to be a part of St. Augustine's history.
Sure.
Thank you.